David, and from me, welcome to the programme.
First, the grandmother who got a visit from police after firing off a letter complaining about a gay pride march.
Officers visited Pauline Howe's home in Norfolk after she wrote to Norwich City Council claiming she was verbally abused during the parade this summer.
The council said Mrs Howe's choice of biblical language made her letter a potential hate crime. She says her right to express her religious beliefs has been compromised. Matt Hudson has the story.
Its organisers wanted Norwich's first gay pride march to spread messages of tolerance and understanding. It may have done that, but 4 months later it's reignited a debate. Where does freedom of speech end and a hate crime begin? A committed Christian, 67-year-old Pauline Howe, protested peacefully against the march. She then wrote to Norwich City Council, claiming she'd been abused by some of those taking part.
People came up and whispered it in my ear and were gone. It was only when I thought about what was said afterwards I realised just how bad it was.
Concerned that her letter might break hate laws, the council passed it to the police. Neither the council nor the police would let us see the exact contents of the letter, but we understand it said that homosexual practices were unacceptable to God and were responsible for spreading diseases. The police told us, "We investigate all alleged hate incidents. In this instance, the individual concerned was visited by officers, the comments discussed, and no further action was taken." Today, the march's organisers claimed Mrs Howe's letter showed the kind of prejudice they were trying to counter.
And we've seen recently with the BNP being on Question Time, this has been discussed a lot. My personal view is I believe in democracy, but I also believe there's a responsibility and there's a limit, and there are some points of view that are too hateful to be said.
But the Christian Institute, which produced the video of Mrs Howe and posted it on YouTube, is now investigating whether her rights have been breached.
I think that the homosexual lobby has become increasingly aggressive and tried to shut down any criticism of homosexual conduct. And I don't think that that is healthy in a free society. Let's have an open debate about it, but let's not send the police around just because someone says something you don't like.
Now both sides say they will continue trying to get their point of view across. Matthew Hudson, Anglia News in Norwich.
Silverstone's chances of retaining the Formula One British Grand Prix look to have improved after the owners of Donington Park failed to meet a midday deadline to prove they had the money to stage it.
The Northamptonshire circuit has hosted the event for the past 23 years, but had lost the rights from next season. But now it could win a reprieve.
Well, our correspondent Neil Bradford joins us live now from Silverstone. So, Neil, a more optimistic mood there then?
Well, certainly the tone coming out of Silverstone is more optimistic since that midday deadline passed without comment from Donington. But both publicly and privately, the tough talk on both sides continues. Formula One rights holder Bernie Ecclestone says it shouldn't automatically be assumed that Silverstone will hold the next British Grand Prix because there may not be the next British Grand Prix. Silverstone, on the other hand, say, well, we're ready to hold the event, but only if the terms are commercially viable. Now, this is a game of poker, if you like. No side wants to show their hand first, but it's not just the circuit that need answers.
Silverstone is understandably proud of its Formula One heritage. Nowhere is that more apparent than at the village pub, where they proudly fly the flag for the sport.
And also we have stalls that are selling motor racing memorabilia like pictures, and then we have another stall that sells the T-shirts.
Landlord Les Adams is desperate to know whether Silverstone will host another Grand Prix. His business relies upon it. In just 3 days, he does the equivalent of 12 weeks' trade, serving more than 3,500 pints every hour. That's more than 50 every single minute.
It takes us about 6 months, really, to get all the infrastructure into place, i.e. we have a massive marquee that we need to extend the pub. We doubled the size of the pub. We also have the toilets, mobile toilets in the car park to cope with all of that. Then the caterers need to be aware, the caterers need to know exactly what they need to order, when they're going to order it, etc. So there's an awful amount to do.
Silverstone has a rich history dating back more than half a century. The circuit staged the first ever Formula One Grand Prix in 1950. Between 1964 and 86, the British Grand Prix was shared between Brands Hatch and Silverstone. The following year, the race returned full-time to the Northamptonshire circuit. In 2003, a dispute over funding improvements put the future of British Grand Prix in doubt. The following year, the race was dropped from the 2005 list before being reinstated. 4 years later, the devastating news that the race had been awarded to Donington Park. Then came today's news that Donington had failed to raise the finance and the British Grand Prix could be staying at Silverstone. Things may be more hopeful, but there is still no cast-iron guarantee.
We've kept in touch with Bernie right the way through the process, and probably more so latterly. It has to be a commercial deal. We don't get any help from anybody else. We're looking for something long-term, so we're hoping that something can be resolved in the not-too-distant future.
Formula One rights holder Bernie Ecclestone is still talking tough, saying there's no reason to stage a British Grand Prix, a point he first made to me 18 months ago.
Britain is no different to any other country. What's the difference? Why should we have sentiments to Britain and not Germany or France or somewhere?
There are going to be no special favours for Britain?
Absolutely.
At the White Horse, like the rest of the village, they're hoping there will be no more frights, and Bernie Ecclestone will spare them the horror of the death of the British Grand Prix.
So, Neil, yet more tough negotiations ahead?
Yes, it seems like we haven't moved much further forward than when I carried out that telephone interview with Bernie Ecclestone in February of last year. Both sides were saying much the same thing then. The managing director of the circuit, Richard Phillips, who you saw in my report, is tonight on a plane to Abu Dhabi, where the final Grand Prix of the season is taking place, for some last-minute negotiations. So we could hear by the weekend whether or not the British Grand Prix is returning to Silverstone. This is, after all, a business negotiation. That's why there is tough talk from both sides. Both sides are trying to broker the best deal. But for the people here at the circuit, and indeed the wider community of Silverstone, an answer can't come soon enough.
Neil, for now, thank you. Bereaved families in Colchester have hit back at claims that parts of the town's cemetery are becoming tacky and vulgar.
New rules have been brought in after the cemetery was described by some as an out-of-town poundland resembling a fun fair.
But families who have relatives buried there say it's nothing of the sort and they should be left alone to grieve how they wish. Our Essex reporter, Lorna Ramsey, has the story.
In parts of Colchester Cemetery, flowers are enough. But in others, families have gone for a very different look. Here there are wind chimes, teddies and solar lights in abundance. It's led to comparisons with an out-of-town poundland, and that's upset many bereaved families. Marlon Sherman's 8-year-old son Harry is buried here. He suffered from cerebral palsy and died in April last year. Mr. Sherman says people shouldn't be criticised for how they mourn their loved ones.
What people put on their stones is surely down to them. If they want to grieve that way, let them grieve that way. And if they have bought something from Poundland, so what? What difference does it make whether it comes from Poundland or Marks and Spencer's? What we're now putting, categorising people when they've died and their graves as to what level of affordability they can put stuff on their graves. I think that's horrendous.
But it's not just decorations that have been criticised. Women dressing in bikinis and people drinking alcohol have also been highlighted as problems. It was all brought up in a council survey, and now a new set of rules have been drawn up about acceptable behaviour. The council sent out around 600 letters as part of the survey, and it received around 200 responses. It said some of the stories of antisocial behaviour and inappropriate dress were extremely concerning, and the regulations are designed to ensure that the cemetery remains a respectful place.
There were things that surprised me that people, of the behaviour people were indulging in the cemetery. People coming to graves stripped to the waist, or women in bikini tops, rowdy, drunken behaviour. The sort of standard of behaviour that you wouldn't expect almost anywhere, but certainly not in a graveyard.
Under the new rules, only 2 trinkets are allowed per grave, and families have been told they have until May to comply. But if they haven't taken them down by then, they're being warned the council will do it for them. Lorna Ramsey, Anglia News, Colchester.
So what do you think about that? Classic story of two sides there, I think.
It's very difficult. We'd love to hear from you, so get in touch through our email address. It's on the screen right now. That's Jonathan and Becky at itv.com.
Plans to change the routes that aircraft take when they approach Stansted and Luton airports have been postponed. The proposals from National Air Traffic Services would have meant new holding patterns for aeroplanes waiting to land at the airports. Campaigners have been worried that the plans would shatter the peace and tranquility of many countryside towns and villages. Nats say consultations will resume next September. They're now looking at alternatives in response to concerns that were raised during the first consultation. Stay with us here on Anglia tonight. Much more to come, including all the news from where you live.
Donnie will be here with a roundup of the sports news. Rachel's got the weather. And if you're stuck for what to do this half-term holiday, we might have some ideas for you.
On the first day of half-term, I'm out and about enjoying the joys of autumn. Here you go.
Reflecting on the past, she was one of the stars of our opening